President Truman announced the official surrender.
This is a solemn but glorious hour. I wish that Franklin D. Roosevelt had lived to see this day. General Eisenhower informs me that the forces of Germany have surrendered to the United Nations.
The year was 1945, and a baby boy was born named Monzer Al Kassar. Alongside him was his older brother named Godfather Al Kassar, and two other brothers. He grew up in a town called Nebek, near the city of Damascus in Syria. His father was Mohammed Al Kassar, whose job was a lawyer and a part-time Syrian diplomat between Canada and India. Not much is known about Monzer's upbringing as a child. It is assumed that he grew up quite wealthy due to his father's standing in Syrian society at the time. All that is known is that he attended law school in the late 1960s, presumably to follow in his father's footsteps. Though, by this point, his older brother, Ghassan, was already selling drugs and armed trafficking. Being the troubled guy that he would lead to being the major catalyst into bringing Monzer into a life of crime and delinquency. Ghassan was leading an international car smuggling ring in 1969, and with a brother you can make influence of and make profit. You know where the story is going. First crime on record was for Grand Theft Auto in 1969. This was likely due to Monzer's connection to an international car operation in October of that year that was spearheaded by his brother Ghassan Al Kassar. When the 1970s rolled around, he went back to the roots of what his brother used to do, drug dealing. The drug of choice was hashish, or hash for short. Hash is a secreted gum which is made from cannabis residue. When smoked, it creates an hallucinogenic feeling, which creates a heightened feeling of euphoria that is highly addictive. The location he targeted was Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark, so he moved there in the early 70s. This illegal business venture ultimately failed, as he was only able to deal for 2 years, after then being caught and arrested by Dutch authorities in 1972 for dealing. Son at some point in the 60s to 70s got married to the daughter of the general Ali Daba, being head of Syrian intelligence at the time, who also supervised narcotics production in occupied Lebanon. After Monzer was arrested, he then moved to England, choosing to then live in London, picking the infamously affluent area of Sloane Square. Monzer got himself involved in another legal operation, which was to import heroin and hash from Lebanon to London, then buying weapons with the profits of the sale to ship them back to the country Lebanon, with the heroin shipments totaling to a massive amount of 100+ kilos. This was most likely connected to the Lebanese Civil War, which lasted between 1975 and 1990, which was a holy war between Lebanese Christians and Muslims. Monzer was helping the Palestinians, who were fighting alongside the Lebanese Muslims, fighting through the mid-70s for equal socio-economic standing with the Christians of the nation. This operation lasted longer, as it went from the early 70s to late 70s, as he was arrested by British authorities. He somehow only served 2 years for selling hash. The reason why Lebanon was such a strong connection to his early criminal career is because by the 80s, the country had become the leading nation in terms of open poppy seeds, plantations and heroin refineries. Eventually, he was expelled from England in 1984. He had also married his wife 3 years prior, in 1981. He was 17 at the time, who he had met in the 70s. She was born in Damascus, Syria, in 1964. Her name was Rakhada Habub, and she was from a well-connected Syrian family in Beirut. They would later have 3 children together, but this forced him to start fresh. He would look for his next country to operate from, and this decision would change his life forever. The first step to becoming a prince is a castle, but in our case, a villa. Al Kassar decided to take the profits and wealth that he had made and purchase a hilltop villa in Marbella, which was a luxury area in Spain. The villa was called the Palacio de Mafedal, his home where he would conduct most of his business while living with his wife and kid. He was surrounded by luscious nature, 3 patrolling passive dogs, and a 12-car garage. He made himself a Spanish enigma, appearing on many talk shows and gaining a reputation for being a wealthy businessman with a mysterious past. The next step for him was upping the ante and the connections he had to increase his profits. Countries he linked himself to were Poland, Yemen, Iran, and so many more. He started zoning in the arms deal and phasing out the drug dealing as he was becoming more well established. It started with him being in contact with Yemen's government, requesting for him to purchase rifles and pistols from Poland on their behalf, becoming Yemen's commercial atish, in layman's terms being the official tradesman and businessman for the country. In other words, a middleman, which by proxy developed a relationship with the Polish military doing illegal arms dealing for them. 1985 was a big year for Monzer, as he was involved in the Iran-Contra scandal, which lasted from 1985 to 87. The reason why it was a scandal was due to the Americans creating a legal agreement with Iran, which was the US secretly selling arms to them, which was against their arms embargo at the time. Funds were used for the Nicaraguan right-wing rebels who were trying to overthrow the left-wing socialist government. This is where an American named Oliver North comes in charge of handling America's arms dealing business. He went behind the President Ronald Reagan's back and paid Monzer $2.2 million for his illegal arms trafficking service. Between the periods of 1985 to 86, he was paid for a Swiss bank account to hide the transactions, and it was in Oliver North's name. Al Kassar services helped arm the right-wing rebels in that civil war. Things started to get serious for Al Kassar when he started dealing with the Palestinian Liberation Front, or the PLF for short. When he last worked with them, he helped them in bringing down a commercial airline and had previous dealings with them in London. The terrorist leader named Abu Abbas needed Al Kassar's help again. Due to their previous dealings, Monzer was extremely close with Abu to the point of them being great friends, so he decided to help. He supplied Abu with weapons for his next hijacking, the Achilles Lara cruise ship of 1985. This hijacking led to the tragic end of an American, the person in question being a Jewish American named Leon Klinghoffer, who was on holiday on that cruise, also being wheelchair bound. The reason why he was picked up by the PLF was due to him being Jewish and the terrorists being extremely anti-Semitic. He was executed and chucked overboard. After this horrendous act, Monzer flew out Abu on one of his personal private jets to safety. This event would lead to Monzer's downfall, as the murder put him on America's radar when they would investigate him years later. In 1992, the year of Al Kassar's last major arms deals, the US put an embargo to stop sending arms to Somalia. So Al Kassar took the opportunity to help fill the gap in for Somalians and send arms. He did this through his connections with the Polish military that he had from his Yemen affairs. He was friends with a director of Polish weapons called Jerry Dąbrowski of a major arms company. Through Jerry and one of Jerry's connections being the head of the Latvian army, Al Kassar was able to send over 10,000 weapons and several millions of AK ammunition. This helped Somali militia stay armed. After these dealings, the governments were starting to notice Al Kassar was becoming a problem. That same year, in 1992, the Swiss bank accounts that Al Kassar had made with his wife in 1990 had been frozen via request by the Spanish government, as they started to notice anomalies with their accounts, with false documents, money laundering, and connections starting to be made between him and the cruise ship hijacking. He was eventually arrested in Spain for charges in piracy and assistance in the hijacking. For the 1995 trial, the authorities were able to collect witnesses in the form of the hijackers that were directly involved. Fortunately, Al Kassar got extremely lucky with this case, as one of the witnesses refused to testify on the day due to fear, meaning he couldn't identify him. The second witness mysteriously fell from a 5th-story window, and the accident was termed an alcoholic coma. The third witness had his children kidnapped before testifying. The man blamed Monzer Al Kassar for the kidnapping of his kids, but surprisingly, Monzer turned around in court and said this, and I quote, "I have nothing to do with the kidnapping, and I hope that it is over as soon as possible. Children are sacred for Arabs. No one, not even your worst enemy, deserves this." Things got even worse for Al Kassar, as due to the trial and his misdemeanors of false documents to get into Argentina, by the year 2000, he had his money that was linked to his crimes taken away from him. The only money he was given back was a clean $3.5 million he had from legitimate affairs. Things went quiet until 9/11. This event changed everything for Monzer Al Kassar and America as a whole. After the infamous attack of September 11, 2001, a new law was put in place in the American justice system due to the renewed interest of cracking down terrorism for obvious reasons. The laws now allowed the US government to pursue and legally punish terrorists outside of the country's jurisdiction. In July of 2006, Iraq put Monzer Al Kassar on the most wanted list in the top 26 people of interest, due to him being the prime arms dealer in Iraq in the 90s. America's DEA group, which stands for the Drug Enforcement Administration, decided to set up a sting operation. They called this Operation Legacy. This operation was led by a man named Jim Solis and with the DEA's Special Operations Division. The integral information they needed was provided by a 69-year-old Palestinian who was a former member of the Black September organization, which was a Palestinian paramilitary group, only referred to by his name Samir, while he was held in US prison. The rest of 2006 was spent trying to arrange a meeting with Al Kassar, which was looking like a lost cause. That was until they were finally able to secure a meeting in December of 2006. The main reason why Al Kassar was even agreeing to this meeting was due to the lack of business he was receiving. There hadn't really been any major wars since the 1990s, and this was before the wars in the Middle East would intensify, leading him to be desperate and sloppy. In February 2007, Samir arranged a meeting between Monzer and the two DEA agents posing as FARC insurgents, Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, looking to use his services to purchase weapons to use against American forces was the cover story. They had met several times, and later in the meeting, Monzer got so sloppy that instead of his usual denial shtick, they were successfully able to secretly record him during the meeting, agreeing to the terms of the fabricated deal. The DEA undercover agents were requested to lure him to Romania for the promise of payment, which was a ruse to get him arrested. But unfortunately he declined. Instead, the location was changed to Madrid in Spain, where authorities caught him at the airport in Madrid and he was finally arrested. It was time to finally face the music. On the 13th of June 2008, he was extradited to America to face trial. Then finally, on the 20th of November 2008, he was convicted on 5 charges, the main ones being money laundering and conspiring to sell to suppliers. This was all done in front of Lynn Klinghoffer's family, the man he indirectly killed, forced to look them in the eyes. Reports say he had a relaxed demeanor when caught, believing he would get away with all the crimes, just like how he did 2 decades previous. This was not the case. A year into his 30-year prison sentence, his older brother Ghassan, who was still actively arms dealing, passed away from natural causes in 2009. To this day, Monzer is expected to be released in 2033. He still actively proclaimed his innocence on Facebook. He's been doing this since 2018, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of Al Kassar's story.